Excited to share Ari Whitten with you. He's a legend in the field. He is a fit, brilliant young man who is now family man, who is out there just crushing it in his real life and helping people find energy. Ari understands exercise physiology, understands nutrition, and has dug into the research to say, why are people tired? What is this thing called adrenal fatigue? And in that process has dug up a lot around mitochondrial health and has really run into why the healthcare system doesn't work. I think that this is an amazing, provocative conversation. I think you're going to really enjoy it. Ari Whitten. Ari Whitten, always a pleasure. So great to have you here.
So great to connect with you as always, my friend.
Yeah, it's been lit. There's a lot of water under the bridge, but every time I see you, it's like it was yesterday. I'm excited to hang out and excited to see what you're up to. You're one of those prolific health influencers who actually does the thing, right?
Not just a businessman.
Not just a businessman, right? And that's, again, there's a lot of people that come in and out of the health space. A lot of them never deal with clients, a lot of them never deal with patients, and a lot of them just don't look healthy, right? And yeah, that's not you. So,
Yeah,
yeah, would love to just get your backstory so we could talk about energy and vitality.
absolutely. It's funny that you bring that up because I tell people all the time, unlike a lot of our colleagues, I'm really not much of a businessman. I mean, I've had to learn business to start a business from scratch when I was a solopreneur and build it from that. But really, I'm just a health and I'm a health geek who happens to be in business. But I've been a health geek since I was a little kid. This has been my lifelong passion since I was 12, 13 years old. And at that time, I was an athlete, I was a martial artist, I was a soccer player. And so I developed an interest in enhancing athletic performance. And then I got into bodybuilding. My older brother was a bodybuilder and a personal trainer. And so I got into that world of body composition and fitness. And all of that kind of coalesced for a very long time. And by the time I was 14 years old, I was reading college level textbooks on nutrition and exercise science. And I was uniquely gifted in science. I mean, I was never a good student. I was never pushed to do well, but in national standardized testing for in high school, I was always 98th, 99th percentile in science, not in other subjects, definitely in science. And so that was just my natural talents and proclivities. And then it was that science focus was directed to health science, athletic performance, body composition, fitness. And that was my world for a long time. I went on to do a degree in exercise science. I became a personal trainer and all that good stuff, high level athlete for a long time. And then in my mid 20s, something shifted. I got mononucleosis from Epstein-Barr virus, and I was left with chronic fatigue for about a year after that. It was really debilitating for me. And that really rocked my world because I had always been a fit, healthy, athletic guy my whole life, were just kind of overflowing with energy. And all of a sudden that was taken away from me. And the very, very short version of the story is I then sought out conventional medical doctors, alternative medical doctors, and functional medicine doctors. And for the most part, conventional medicine had nothing to offer with chronic fatigue. In fact, they diagnosed me in the first place with strep throat. They got the diagnosis wrong and prescribed me penicillin, which obviously didn't help my viral induced mononucleosis. But they didn't have much to offer for chronic fatigue either. And then the alternative functional medicine world was really caught up in this idea of adrenal fatigue. And I was too at that time. And a lot of my mentors, the people I admired since I was a teenager studying this topic, were talking about adrenal fatigue. So I kind of got into that. I became sort of personally identified with the diagnosis of having adrenal fatigue, and that explained my symptoms. And then I kind of discovered that conventional medicine brushes off this whole story of adrenal fatigue as pseudoscience. And at that time, it really irked me to see the way that conventional medicine kind of pushed this aside as a bunch of nonsense. So I had this idea that I was going to prove to conventional medicine that adrenal fatigue was real and the science does support it. So I started going into the primary literature and started to find studies. And first of all, I didn't find any studies on adrenal fatigue, which was kind of a red flag. I started probing other things like fatigue and cortisol, or stress and cortisol, or chronic fatigue syndrome and cortisol, or burnout syndrome, or clinical burnout and cortisol. And then I would start to come up with studies. And, the first interview that you and I ever did, we talked about this because at that time, I was just coming off of spending a year of my life. Uh, this was, geez, 10 years ago or something. I don't know exactly when it was, but I just spent a year of my life basically exploring all this primary literature. And the very short version of this summary of a year of my life is the research doesn't support that adrenal fatigue is a real thing. And it doesn't support that the majority of people who have fatigue have any issue whatsoever with their adrenal function or HPA axis function or cortisol levels. And that finding, which went against my bias, went against what I wanted to find, kind of rocked my world. And at that point, as I was exploring what everybody has to offer on the subject of energy and fatigue and what controls human energy levels, I realized that nobody really understood it very deeply. And I said, well, I've been studying health science, and this is my passion, my obsession for like 15, 17 years now. Now I'm uniquely interested in the energy and fatigue side of this story, not just body composition and athletic performance. Why don't I direct all of that energy to building out a scientific understanding of fatigue? So, and what regulates human energy levels. And that's what I've been doing for the last decade.
Yeah, and I'm thankful you have because you've helped a lot of people. Um, and it's complicated fatigue, right? And we're going to get into your gestalt around it, but you hear a lot. Obviously, there's the adrenal thesis, which you stand against, right? And there's people still doing all sorts of adrenal work out there.
Mhm.
Then there's the toxicity thesis that the reason you're tired is because the world is filthy and it's the chemicals and the this and that and the cloud of gunk that's strangling your mitochondria. My bet is you'll say that's partially true, right? Um, right, and then there's nutritional deficiencies. Then, and I think muscle mass, ATP, and some of these areas that we explored. There's an interview with Ben Pakulski in here just about focusing on muscle instead of not fat, right? Which I think people will find interesting in the summit. And my guess is your thesis will kind of ride along that. I don't know where your thinking has
Yeah,
changed.
by the way, Ben's a good friend of mine. He stayed in my house in Costa Rica a few months ago, taking care of my dogs while I was in Chile.
One of the biggest
Um,
problems I had with Ben's interview is his shoulders didn't fit the frame.
well, yeah, I mean, they're half the size as they used to when he
Oh,
was at the peak of his bodybuilding career.
yeah, well, that's it, and that's part of my thesis here is, um, listen to the people that look the part, that are doing the
Yeah,
work, right? And so you're famously fit and stay fit and you do the thing, and you're hanging out with guys that are doing the same. So I'm going to leave it open like that because you and I haven't caught up in a bit. So my audience is going to do a ride along in Ari's current thinking. But go high level and then let's have some fun with this.
sure. So, first of all, you mentioned mitochondria. I want to point out just right off the bat that, when you and I first met close to a decade ago, you remember I was talking a lot about mitochondria. And at that time, nobody was talking about mitochondria. And, I was talking a lot about hormetic stress. Nobody was talking about hormetic stress. I would bring up that word and people would cock their head to the side and be like, what the hell is that? You know? And now it's popular. Now mitochondria are in vogue. Um, so here's here's the deal. Um, there are lots of parts of the machine, meaning our body, that are necessary to produce energy. There are lots of elements of this system that are necessary, such that if you were to not have it, it would lead to big problems. Let me give an analogy. So imagine a car. There are lots of parts of that car that are necessary for that car to function. If you remove the engine block, car's not going to work very well. Take off the wheels and tires, not going to work very well. Remove the spark plugs, won't work, on and on and on. But none of those things I just mentioned are the thing that's actually regulating energy levels. That's deciding whether that car is driving down the road or it's at a standstill or how fast it's going. Okay. Is the accelerator pedal being pushed or is the brake being pushed? And that's the thing that's regulating it, which is in this case, the human in the car deciding which to push and how hard. So when we look at human physiology, there's lots of things that are important and do important functions. Thyroid hormone, you see in the functional medicine community, everybody's like, it's the thyroid. No, it's the gut. No, it's the adrenals. It's the HPA axis. It's gut brain axis, right? It's immune system, whatever, right? It's kind of this reductionism down to one system. All these systems are important, right? And the same is true when we look at different factors like um, is it's stress. And you see people, there's kind of I think like a kink in human psychology where we all become obsessed with like the one thing. And we all need to simplify things to reduce it down to this one thing. It's chronic stress. No, it's the gut. No, right? Like it's leaky gut. That's the big cause of everybody's problems. It's mold. It's viruses. It's chronic infections. It's trauma. It's toxins. It's whatever it is.
We all know it's the chemtrails, Ari. Just say it.
That's right. It's poor nutrition. It's all these things. All of these things are important, and all the systems of the body, the gut, the thyroid, the HPA axis, the muscles, all these systems are important. We need to have a more holistic paradigm, not in the sense of meaning natural, but in the sense of the whole. We have to look at what's going on in the big picture of how everything links together because everything's interconnected. And in appreciating that all the different parts are important, we also need to understand what's most upstream, what's actually regulating and making decisions about how this system functions. So I explained how that works in the car. How does it work in us? Well, a lot of it centers around the mitochondria. And I say that not in the sense that mitochondria are the only thing, but in the sense that they tend to be the most upstream thing in regulating energy of the body. And I'll explain how this works. So for a long time, for decades, everybody was taught that mitochondria, you and me in our high school and college and graduate school biology, physiology courses, it's like mitochondria are taught about as sort of, they're the powerhouse of the cell. That's the thing everybody remembers. But they're taught about as sort of these mindless cellular energy generators that what they do is they take in carbs and fats, pump out energy. And that's the story of mitochondria. And well, if that was, what explains cellular energy production, the story of how to have more energy would be very simple. We just take in more carbs and fats, boom, more energy. It's that simple. Except, of course, we know that doesn't work. And if anything, the opposite is true. If you take in too much carbs and fats, you lower your energy levels. So what's going on, and this was really elucidated by a researcher named Dr. Robert Naviaux, who runs a lab for mitochondrial medicine at the University of California, San Diego. And he published a paper about a decade ago called the cell danger response. And the cell danger response was a synthesis of decades of research on the mitochondria by researchers all over the world who basically were uncovering all these different functions of the mitochondria and realizing that they were way more important and did way more stuff in human physiology than simply take in fuel and pump out energy. They do that, but they also do lots of other stuff. And to reduce this down, basically what he determined is that the mitochondria have essentially two roles in human physiology. One is as energy generators, and the other one is as environmental sensors. So they are not just producing the energy, they are deciding whether or not to produce energy, how much to produce. And the way they do that is essentially by taking samples of the environment, what's going on in the body, in the cell, and deciding, they're asking the question, is it safe for us to produce energy? So they're assessing, is there danger present? Is there threat present? Is there too high of a stress load present that's overwhelming the body? Is the body under attack in some way? And if it is, to the extent that it senses those danger signals, it turns down the dial on energy mode, on energy production, and shifts resources towards cellular defense. Dr. Navio calls this peacetime metabolism and wartime metabolism. And these roles are mutually exclusive. So it's not an on-off switch, but it's like a dimmer switch. The more you are doing wartime metabolism, the more that energy mode, peacetime metabolism, gets turned off. And that is the fundamental thing that's regulating human energy levels. Now, the question is, what are these danger signals? Well, the truth is, the mitochondria can sense virtually every type of threat and danger that you can think of. And it's not because they have a receptor for nutritional deficiency stress and receptor for this type of toxin and this type of toxin and that type of toxin and a receptor for pathogens and infections and a sensing mechanism to know when you're physically overtraining or you're psychologically stressed or every other type of stressor. It's because all of these different types of stressors on the system ultimately converge on a few different pathways. Oxidative and nitrosative stress, increasing inflammatory cytokines, and cellular damage. And there are certain signals that get released, certain compounds that get released from inside the cell to outside the cell when the cell gets damaged. Those are signaling molecules that the body is under attack in some way. And that happens with basically every type of stressor you can imagine. It happens with sleep deprivation. It happens with psychological stress. It happens with toxins. It happens with infections, with physical overtraining, any type of stressor you can mold and, whatever else. So it senses everything. And the total allostatic load of all these different stressors, basically that load relative to your cellular capacity to handle stress, your stress and energy buffering capacity, determines whether you're going to be in energy mode or defense mode. Okay. And that is the primary thing that's dictating how much energy we have.
I love that. It's very succinct and binary in some way, as far as a dimmer switch can be binary, right? It's left, right versus on, off.
Nothing's binary these days.
Exactly. That's very true. And
No,
so,
but in all seriousness, this idea of thinking of things as a continuum is a useful context, and certainly it's very true here.
yeah, but I mean, so there's another format, right? Like it used to be, we would say you're either in sympathetic or parasympathetic, right? There's been a lot of these things that have come through the kind of functional medicine realm in the last 10, 12 years. I've heard, every time I think I've heard it all, I'll hear something new. But how does this switch or this dimmer relate to sympathetic and parasympathetic, fight or flight versus, build, rest, and digest? Is there a correlation or not?
There is. So I'm going to answer this in a very short and direct way first, and then we'll do the longer answer because there's another very important layer to this story that you and I have talked about before. So the very brief answer is, in general, there's a lot of overlap between, to the extent that you're in wartime metabolism, and you're kind of being shifted out of energy mode to defense mode in the autonomic nervous system. So what I said before is that the mitochondria are the most upstream thing. It doesn't mean they're the only thing. It means they're sort of the most sensitive thing. They're the canaries in the coal mine. They're the thing that's sensing it and then starting the process of shifting physiology. And there's lots of shifts that take place at the cellular level, at the mitochondrial level, to the cellular level, to the macro level, to whole system signaling, to inflammatory changes, immune changes in the body, nervous system, autonomic nervous system changes, and lots of other layers to this story of all the shifts that take place when your metabolism go from peacetime metabolism to wartime metabolism. Dr. Navio calls the mitochondria the central hub of the wheel of metabolism. Metabolism, people are used to thinking of this as like something related to weight loss. It's become synonymous with resting metabolic rate. But the word metabolism, what it's really referring to in physiology, is the totality of all of the biochemical reactions that occur in all of your body. And what he's saying is mitochondria are at the center of the hub of the wheel. meaning they are impacting on almost everything that's going on in our body, impacting on hormones, impacting on neurotransmitters, impacting on the nervous system, and so on. So that's the short version of the answer is yes, there's absolutely a lot of overlap. You can't be in a beautiful nervous system state, autonomic nervous system state, while your mitochondria are in wartime metabolism. Things in the body are connected. So it's not like one system over here is functioning great and this one's super unhealthy and diseased. It doesn't generally work like that. There's parts of the system that may become diseased faster than others and where dysfunction may appear sooner. But in general, if you've got severe dysfunction occurring in one part of the system, especially a really integral part like the mitochondria, it's going to manifest pretty much everywhere. You're going to have brain fog. You're going to have poor energy levels. You're going to have poor gut function. You're going to have hormonal problems, nervous system problems, and so on. Okay, so that's the short answer. The longer answer is this. So there's another layer to this story of mitochondria that's really important. And it is that we need to understand not only whether the mitochondria are in energy mode or defense mode, peacetime metabolism or wartime metabolism, but we also need to understand what is the status of our mitochondria in our cells, meaning how big and strong are they physically? What is the physical structure of our mitochondria? And how many of them do we have? Okay, and so let me give you some specifics on this. There's a number of lines of evidence that have shown that the average 70-year-old has lost 75% of their mitochondrial capacity, their cellular energy production capacity. So what this is, I want people to understand this distinction. So one aspect is, let's say you have 1,000 mitochondria in your cells. Okay, so one distinction is to what extent are those 1,000 mitochondria in wartime metabolism or peacetime metabolism? The other thing is, how big and strong are those mitochondria, those thousands of 1,000 mitochondria? And the other thing is, do you have 1,000 mitochondria per cell or 2,000 or 3,000 mitochondria per cell? Okay, and I'm just making up these numbers for math purposes here. That's a rough average of how much mitochondria we actually do have, but it differs. Some cells have maybe 5,000 or 10,000 mitochondria per cell. Other cells have much fewer. So, but the basic idea is the average 70-year-old has lost 75% of their mitochondrial capacity. Okay. This is not a small amount. This is, as an analogy, this is like going from a Ferrari V8 engine in your cells when you're 20 to a moped engine or a lawnmower engine when you're 70. So, and this is part of the big mistake that people in functional medicine are currently making, even though mitochondria are in vogue now and everybody's talking about mitochondrial dysfunction. Most people understand that as simply, they don't understand the physical structure side of it. They see it as just a biochemical thing. So we just need to provide cofactors to the mitochondria. So we fix this mitochondrial dysfunction by giving B vitamins and alpha lipoic acid and CoQ10 and PQQ and, things of that nature, some magnesium and so on. But if you put in the right fuel to a lawnmower engine, it doesn't turn it into a Ferrari engine. Okay. You can make that lawnmower engine function a bit better and get the most out of it, but it's still a lawnmower engine. And you're still going to be at a massive deficit if that's what's going on inside your body. So here's the positive side of the story, because most people are listening to this thinking, well, geez, that really sucks.
How do I get my Ferrari back?
Yeah. Well, people think, are probably thinking we're it really sucks that we lose that much of our cellular engine as we age. But the good news is this is not actually a natural product of the aging process per se. This is actually a product of modern lifestyles. And it's not just a product of stress and toxins and things like that damaging our mitochondria. It's a product of metabolic stress on the system, lack of hormetic stress, lack of what I call physiological challenges on that system. So the principle at play, and actually we know this because when we look at lifelong athletes who are 70 years old, they don't lose 75% of their mitochondrial capacity. They have the same mitochondrial capacity as young adults do. So that's how we know that this is a product of how we live our behaviors, not a product of the aging process itself. I should also mention there's a huge body of literature that has now emerged linking poor cellular energy production and what's called bioenergetic reserve capacity. What is the total energy production capacity of the cell? To almost every disease you can think of. All the chronic diseases of aging that kill 8 out of 10 of us, heart disease and cancer and diabetes and stroke and liver disease and on and on and on. And the rate of aging itself. Okay? The rate of aging, which is largely a function of how much cellular damage you're accumulating, the rate that that's happening is largely a function of to what degree you have physiological resilience, you have stress buffering capacity. And one of the keys to stress buffering capacity in human physiology is bioenergetic energy buffering capacity. And that comes from mitochondria. That's at the core of it. So if you lose 75% of your cellular engine, this is not just something that manifests as, okay, well, I have a little less energy than other people do, and I have more fatigue. So what? This is, yeah, you have more fatigue and you're massively more prone to all these diseases of aging, and you are literally aging faster at the cellular level.
Well, so there's the theory of aging, right? And that all these major kind of chronic diseases lead to that. But everyone in the theory of aging argument right now is trying to find a rapamycin or a something to solve the clock versus what you're talking about here. Which again is just fascinating how people go about trying to solve these problems in a roundabout way. So let's talk about half the people listening to this are not 75, but they're like, "Oh damn, I'm headed there," right? So let's talk about how you stop the bleeding and build the machinery, but let's do it around doing it the right way.
Okay, so let's talk about what you said there. I love what you said. So, and this is where my paradigm will differ from almost everybody out there. Okay. First of all, we have to understand that the field of geroscience, which is the science of aging, has almost become totally siloed from the practice of modern medicine. There's almost zero connection between these two fields. In modern medicine, we have, for nearly a century, gone down the path of fixating on the idea that our health is the absence of disease. That's how we define health. It's the absence of disease. So as a logical extension of, if health is the absence of disease, the way to achieve health is to study disease. And by studying disease and uncovering all the mechanisms of disease and the mechanisms of atherosclerosis and the mechanisms of diabetes and the mechanisms of dementia and Alzheimer's disease, and if we invest trillions of dollars into that and giving it to the world's brightest medical scientists, pharmaceutical scientists, to study all these mechanisms of these diseases that are killing us, which we've done for 75 years now. And then we go to the chemistry laboratory and we synthesize chemicals that are targeted to those mechanisms that we have uncovered in our research. Okay, so it's this receptor and it's the LDL and getting into the endothelium, and it's this mechanism of insulin resistance and gluconeogenesis and and the amyloid plaques in the brain, and depression is a result of this serotonin deficiency in the brain. So once we have that knowledge of the mechanisms of disease, now we go to the chemistry laboratory, we create chemicals, pharmaceuticals, which are designed to impact on or block or inhibit these different specific mechanisms that we think are driving these diseases. Okay. And this paradigm has been pretty much an abject failure when it comes to the chronic diseases of aging, the things that kill 8 out of 10 of us. So what's fascinating is yet, despite that, we keep pouring more money into it. And not only that, but that's how everyone thinks. We still, almost everybody, who goes to school and studies this, and you go become an MD, you go to pathology classes, the study of disease, and pharmacology classes, the study of what drugs apply to what diseases. So it's kind of interesting to consider, where did this whole idea even come from? If we zoom out and think at the paradigm level, I could go really meta here, but as psychology as an example, there's all kinds of different paradigms of psychology. This one says we're going to analyze your childhood. This one says, that's like Freudian psychotherapy, and CBT says we're going to analyze your negative thoughts and place them with positive thoughts. You've got people saying, oh, we need to heal your chakras and your past life karma. And, you have all kinds of different paradigms. These are paradigms. These are ways of understanding problem and what to do about it. And what most people don't understand is that the modern medical approach is a paradigm. It's a way of understanding what's going on. And it's a way that works in certain contexts, and it's a way that doesn't work in a lot of contexts. So the way where this came from was really about 100 years ago. We observed petri dishes where certain bacteria didn't grow very well when they were next to species of mold. And then certain scientists figured out that this penicillium mold species was producing chemicals that killed the bacteria. And out of that came the antibiotic revolution. And it truly was a revolution. It cured diseases that killed tons of people. And within a matter of days of taking this like heat-seeking missile, you put this chemical in your body, it goes in your bloodstream, and it destroys the bad guy. Boom, disease cured. Okay, and that concept was so alluring, so powerful in our minds, that basically what scientists did, 175 years ago, is basically say, well, if we can do this with bacterial diseases, maybe we can do this with everything else. So let's study to find what the bad guy is that's causing heart disease, and what's causing stroke and liver disease and obesity and diabetes and dementia. And once we find that bad guy, we develop a chemical that kills it or combats it or blocks it. Right? That's what we've been doing for 75 years. So then you have geroscience, which has emerged. And basically these scientists in the field of studying aging have basically said their central premise is, the whole paradigm of trying to go after specific diseases doesn't really work. And what the reason why it doesn't really work, actually, let me tell you something interesting. There's a researcher named Jay Olshansky that published a paper a decade ago or 15 years ago. He's one of the most prominent geroscience scientists. And this paper was an examination of, if we cured X disease, how many years would we live longer? Okay, so our current life expectancy of our population is 73 years old for men, 79 years old for women. What would happen if we cured heart disease? All heart disease cured, not a treatment that is a breakthrough treatment that reduces heart disease by 20%, which would be a miracle, but a complete cure. Heart disease does not exist anymore. It went from the number one killer to cured. Nobody gets heart disease anymore. What most people would think is that this would extend our lifespan by 10, 20, 30, 40 years. It would be a major breakthrough. If we get rid of the number one killer, of course, we'd all live way longer. Okay, it actually extends our expected lifespan by about 4 years. Even if we had the most miraculous breakthrough and completely cured the number one killer. Imagine cancer, all the dozens of types of cancer that everyone dreads so much. If we completely cured all cancers, okay, not one type of cancer, not a 20%, 50% reduction, all dozens of types of cancer, complete cure. Okay, it would add about 3 years of expected life expectancy that we could expect to gain from a complete cure. So what people don't understand is that even if we succeeded in the approach we're taking now and cured major diseases that are the major killers, I just gave the example of the number one and number two killers. If we succeeded, it still wouldn't even do very much for us.
So we're
And
talking billions of dollars of research for each of these killers playing whack-a-mole. But just if you could expand on, okay, if cancer didn't get me, heart disease didn't get me, then what gets me? Expand on what then fills the void.
okay. So imagine if we cured almost all the major diseases. It would actually only lead to an expected life expectancy gain of about 15 years. Okay, so instead of dying at age 73, you might die at age 88 if you're a man, or 79 for women. Now you die at, the math is 90 something, 93 or 94. Um, but even then, most people would actually not realize that 15 years of gain. It would only get maybe 5 or 10. And the reason why is because most people would die of what's called old age, dying of old age. Okay. And actually, a huge portion of people die of old age, essentially. And what old age is multi organ system failure. Okay. It's not one specific mechanism that kills you, it's your body's basically shutting down. And what people don't realize is a huge portion of people are already dying of old age, essentially. Their body's failing in multiple different ways, but dying of old age can't be listed as a cause of death legally. It's not categorized. So we categorize it as the most notable dysfunction that's present. So it was the complications of diabetes that killed you, or it's the cancer, it's the dementia. But it doesn't actually work like that. And we know this because when we look at that demographic of people, almost all of them have multiple conditions, not just one. They have multiple conditions and they're on multiple drugs, 4, 5, 8, 12, 15 different drugs. They don't have one specific mechanism that causes one specific disease. That's the only thing wrong with them in an otherwise healthy body. They have lack of health systemically. That's driving many different kinds of dysfunction and disease in many different systems of their body. Okay. So this is what geroscientists know. And what they're saying is it's not, we've got it all wrong. It's not these specific diseases that are killing us. It's the rate of biological aging itself. How fast our cells, our biology is growing older, as opposed to chronological aging, how many days or years you've been alive. We're talking about the rate of biological aging, which is how much damage are you accumulating, how rapidly you're accumulating that biological damage during the period you are alive. It can be either fast or slow. So that's the central idea of geroscientists. And the basic idea is whatever these specific things are that's going wrong with us, the chronic diseases of aging, the main thing that's driving them is aging. And what we are doing is leaving out the aging part of the equation and just going to the disease and saying it's these specific diseases that's the problem. If only we cured the heart disease, if only we cured the dementia, if only we cured the cancer. But it's wrong. It's totally wrong. The reason that most people don't know that is, and most doctors don't even know it, is because the whole industry is set up around disease and disease treatment. So to incorporate the things that I've just communicated to you would mean overhauling everything about the way we do things. And obviously there's a $1 trillion industry that's not particularly interested in that, which has a huge influence on how science is done and how medicine is done and how doctors are educated and which researchers get funded to do which studies. The whole system is set up to study disease and develop drugs for disease. What's interesting is even the geroscientists who know this, who agree with everything I just said, that's their central premise. It's aging. It's the rate of biological aging. That's the primary thing that matters, not these specific diseases. They are still, I would argue, really operating in the paradigm of, well, let's study the mechanisms and develop the chemistry laboratory and develop drugs to fix these mechanisms. Okay, so the difference is they're saying it's not those specific mechanisms over there, the LDL and the amyloid plaques and um, whatever else, these other, mechanisms associated with diabetes or, things like that. It's not those mechanisms of disease, it's these mechanisms of aging. the telomere shortening, the DNA damage, the lack of stem cells, the senescent cells, the NAD plus, these kinds of things. So we need to develop drugs for those mechanisms. And I personally believe that that is also misguided. They would disagree with me. They'd maybe say my thinking is primitive. Cool. We're all taking bets on what we think is going to work. And I have my layers of evidence. But the reason that we think differently fundamentally is my background, as I said earlier, is in physical training. My background is in exercise and nutrition. Since I was a little kid, my background is the art and science of how we change human physiology through behavior. And their background is pharmacology and pathology. They're different paradigms. The same way that two people who are in the field of agriculture, one person's trained in regenerative agriculture and ecosystems design and permaculture, is going to see things very differently from somebody who's got a PhD in agricultural chemicals, agricultural chemistry, right? They're going to have different solutions to the same problem with different side effects. So here's that's the landscape as it exists right now.
A couple quick questions on that. Sorry, a couple quick questions. One is, how much of it is, in your assessment, obviously we don't know this answer, the paradigm through which their mind filters information in terms of pharmacology or, just the way they think versus the way NIH is going to dole out research money. And if heart disease is number one on the scoreboard, then the heart disease guys get more grants, which means their department gets to thrive. I mean, there's the politics of money, and then the closed-mindedness of humans that is the unseen, right? And these are brilliant people that are not seeing the limitations of their thinking. Just quick question on that.
Yeah, I couldn't quantify it for you, and there's no question they overlap massively, because the way that industry influences things is down to literally the curriculum of medical schools. Like, let me put it this way, 80% of the chronic disease burden are diseases of nutrition and lifestyle. Medical doctors receive almost zero education in nutrition and lifestyle. Just sit with the absurdity of that. And this is not by accident. It's not because anybody's ignorant of the power of nutrition and lifestyle and the role of them in disease. It's because industry dictates that there is a financial incentive to do things this way as opposed to this way. So you want to study how yoga and nutrition impacts dementia? Nah, I don't think we're going to fund that because there's no money at the end of it. You want to study what chemicals can be synthesized in a chemical laboratory to slow down the rate of dementia? Yes, we'll fund you, right? That's how it works on every level in the whole system of how we do medicine. So even within geroscience, the profit incentives are still there. It's still being directed towards biotechnology pharmaceutical companies because that's where the money is. Now,
so interesting, but like you have a pro football team with a couple stars on it, and you have a losing record. You clear your roster, you trade your stars, you start over, because the point is to win, and allopathy is just not winning with chronic disease.
That's right. And that's a great way of phrasing it. Let me give you numbers. So we have to understand, as I said before, we're talking decades, multiple decades now of essentially all the world's brightest, highest IQ, many of whom have higher IQs than I do, no doubt. It's not, this is a paradigm thing. It's not an IQ thing. It's because my background's in physical training, so I see things differently, even if they have a higher IQ than me, and I'm sure many of them do. So what I'm saying is, for decades, we've been pouring trillions of dollars into all these incredible genius level medical scientists and pharmaceutical scientists. Now just consider, and we have a mountain of knowledge of the mechanisms of disease. I mean, an enormous body of knowledge on the mechanisms of disease. There's no shortage of knowledge. So after all of that, and we've synthesized millions of potential drug candidates in these chemistry laboratories. And out of those millions of drug candidates, 19,000 of them have gone on to full FDA approval. Out of those 19,000 drugs that we've synthesized over decades of these super smart, brilliant scientists, with that knowledge of all these mechanisms of disease, we don't have a single drug, not one, that we know we can give to otherwise healthy people that will make them healthier or will have longevity benefits or disease prevention benefits that outweigh the harms, the side effects that come with it. We don't have one drug that we know actually is an anti-aging, health promoting drug. Now, there are lots of potential candidates, and there's all kinds of talk. And the reason there is all kinds of talk has nothing to do with the fact that there's a huge body of evidence showing how amazing these compounds are. The evidence is really, really underwhelming. And the reason there's all kinds of talk around it constantly is because the concept of a magic pill, a magic longevity drug, is just so alluring in our minds. And we've all been indoctrinated into this paradigm I just described to believe that the answers will be found in a pharmaceutical laboratory, in a pill. And it's just not true. Now, the last thing I'll mention here is just to illustrate this. After all of these decades, after all these millions of drug candidates, you know what the most powerful anti-aging medicine in existence is? Exercise. Exercise. Maybe second place is nutrition. After all these fancy tests, conventional tests and functional medicine tests and all these things, you know what the single best predictor, the single test that best predicts your longevity is?
Don't tell me touch your toes.
Far off.
Right.
It's VO2 max. And the second best is muscular strength. These are just, and it's not that there's anything magical going on there. They're just markers for how physically fit you are. Okay. So the paradigm that I espouse, which is the subject of my new book, is to shift out of this biochemistry centric and pharmaceutical centric paradigm of disease and longevity and energy, and realize that there are macro level forces at play. And specifically, if I can break this down, if you imagine, the central principle of this is that the human body is an intelligent, adaptive machine. Okay, so if we are looking at this computer that's in front of us, or this cup, or the chair we're sitting in, or a desk, or a bicycle, or a car, or something like that, the way that those systems work is that the more they're subjected to stress. So if you take a bicycle or a car, you drive it down a bumpy dirt road. Okay, the more it's subjected to mud and water and oxidation and sun and bumps and all these mechanical stress and all these kinds of things, the faster that system breaks down. With an intelligent adaptive system, it doesn't break down when it's subjected to the right kinds of stressors in the right dosage. It actually grows stronger. So as an analogy, imagine a magical sports car that when you take it out on windy mountain roads and push it to its limits and rev that engine and, push it as hard as you possibly can, you go park it in your garage at night and you come back to the car the next day, and that engine grew bigger and stronger, and it became more fuel efficient. It became more aerodynamic, and the frame got stronger, and the tires developed more friction to grip the road better, and the suspension learned to absorb the bumps better. And everything about that car got better and stronger. That is an intelligent adaptive system, and it's adapting to the demands. But the downside of having this magical ability is that if you were to leave that car in the garage for 2 months and not challenge it, you come back to it 2 months later and the frame is rusting and the wheels are falling off and the engine has shrunk to a lawnmower engine, and everything about that car starts to disintegrate and fall apart. What I believe is that this is how the human body works. And I'm writing a book for the last 6 months on exactly how that works in every different system of our body. But this, not mysterious biochemicals and LDL cholesterol and NAD plus and this kinds of stuff, but these macro level forces are what's driving the physical structure of our body to degenerate.
So you're falling on panicking ears right now. 2 months, could have been 2 years, could have been 2 weeks, but everyone is guilty. I mean, I'm sitting here right now talking to you, right? I move back and forth between a standing desk. Um, we're all guilty as charged of not revving the engine and, taking those curves the way we should. Um, is there a Jesus plan for this, right? Is there a redemption for those who are down to lawnmower engine? Like, what is the recommendation set to say, "Oh, damn, start today"? How do you start building it back up?
You sit in your chair, you twiddle your thumbs, and you wait for pharmaceutical scientists to synthesize the magic pill.
Totally. Help me, oh industry.
So listen, as I said, there's no more powerful. We've synthesized millions of drug candidates. Nothing comes close to the power of exercise. Why exercise? I mean, if you think about it, it's kind of weird. I know in the sense it's normal, it's an everyday observation. And on the one hand, I'm not saying anything original or novel because we've all heard thousands of times that exercise is healthy. But why is it healthy? Why is what is exercise? Why is it healthy? It's moving your physical body vigorously. Okay. Now consider even that's kind of weird. Like, why is moving your body vigorously such a potent disease preventive medicine? Right? If you were like an alien, if you knew nothing about human health and had never heard exercise would help, somebody told you for decades we've been studying millions of drugs. We're going to find the answer to disease prevention and longevity. Oh wait, it turns out that moving your physical body vigorously for like 30 minutes or 40 minutes a day actually is way more powerful. It's kind of weird. So, um, if you also know that moving your body vigorously creates a big spike of free radicals and creates a physiological stress response with like adrenaline and sympathetic fight or flight activation and all these cortisol and all these kinds of things that most people have a negative association with, now it's even weirder because aren't free radicals like really damaging to our cells? If anything, shouldn't this whole moving your body vigorously that creates the stress response and all these stress hormones and the free radicals, shouldn't it be damaging to our bodies? But it's not. It's the most potent longevity drug there is, and the most potent way to, and these physiological challenges more broadly are the most potent way to recover your cellular engine. Going back to that, rebuilding your mitochondria back into that Ferrari V8 engine, and getting youthful levels of energy back. It's also the key to that because energy buffering and stress buffering capacity are at the core of disease prevention and longevity. These concepts all go together. So why is exercise this way? And the reason why is because the body is an intelligent adaptive system. It requires, we have evolved to require challenge in order for the system not to fall apart. Okay. So the principle is this in a nutshell. If I go to a gym and I lift heavy objects, if I challenge my muscles to move heavy objects, my muscles will adapt to that stress, that demand, because it's not that they want big muscles. They just care about survival. So if you give it the signal that you need muscular strength to survive in this environment, your body will adapt to that survival signal by growing in bigger, stronger muscles. Okay. But if you break an arm or a leg and you immobilize that muscle in a cast, you don't use it for 2 months, you get that cast sawed off by the doctor 2 months later, you look down at your leg, it's half the size of the other one because the opposite principle is at play. The muscles are atrophying now from not being challenged. Okay? That same principle occurs at the level of our mitochondria. It occurs at the level of our heart with what's called cardiovascular reserve capacity. It occurs at our muscles, obviously. It occurs in our bones. This is why we lose bone density as we get older and become frail. And frailty, physical frailty, also loss of muscle strength, is a major driver, the most common driver of early death in adults over the age of 65, and the number one cause of disability and loss of physical independence. Okay, it's physical frailty. That's not from mysterious biochemicals, and senescent cells and NAD plus and stuff that can be fixed with pharmaceuticals. That's from the signals that you're providing to your body. How strong does it need to be? Okay. Cardiovascular reserve capacity, I already told you, VO2 max is the number one predictor of longevity. Mitochondrial reserve capacity is critical for disease prevention and longevity and slowing the rate of aging. There's even such a thing called cognitive reserve capacity. Pedram, do you know how you build? So if I build stronger muscles by challenging my muscles with lifting heavy weights, how do you think I build more cognitive reserve capacity?
Read a book, learn something.
Exactly. So there's all this research on how cognitive reserve capacity, the extent to which we challenge our brain, our mind to learn things, and have demanding jobs and so on, that where we're actively engaging and using cognitive systems in our brain, is linked with massively lower risk of dementia and Alzheimer's. Right? It's not mysterious amyloid plaques that we need pharmaceuticals to interrupt, go in and block this chemical that's involved in amyloid plaque formation. And when we build better brain power from challenging our brain, it protects us massively from those amyloid plaques, from Parkinson's, from Alzheimer's disease and dementia. And just to extend that one more layer, we also know that mitochondria play a big role in there. We also know, there was a study, I believe out of Sweden, they followed 1,400 women over 40 years and looked at the incidence of dementia according to fitness levels. And they found that the group with the highest level of fitness reduced their odds of having dementia by 88%. In the lowest fitness, it was almost half the women, 45% of that group, that got dementia and Alzheimer's. In the highest levels of fitness, it's almost 0%. It's almost none of them ever developed in this 40-year span of time, ever developed dementia. And there's lots of reasons why. So if you compare something like that, physical capacity, cardiovascular capacity and cognitive reserve capacity, you're massively reducing your risk of dementia and Alzheimer's. There's no drug or no combination of drugs that can come anywhere close to those kind of effects.
How do the mitochondria now play into that? We talked about mitochondria, we talked about hormetic stressors. Like, how does it come back? Are we, if I start moving my body, start building cardiac muscle and, leg muscles, is it the density of the mitochondria and the muscles? Am I building new Ferrari engine? Am I restoring? Like, let's go back to that metaphor so everyone understands how this works. Hey, I hope you're enjoying this interview as much as I did. I love Ari Whitten. I love his perspective. I love the way he looks at this problem because he's here to solve the problem, doesn't live in the problem. Just want to remind you, if you haven't done so already, upgrade to the full package. This summit is for you to keep once you've upgraded it. Right now, this thing is going to pass. It'll be gone. You'll say, hey, I remember hearing something smart. What did that guy say? You get to own it. You get to own the audios. You get to own the transcripts and look at the bonuses we put in there for you. Qigong practices, meditation practices, all the things. After sitting through these 40 some odd interviews, I sat with my team and said, what tools do these people need to now take what they've learned and enact it, to put it into their life? That is all part of the bonus package. That is all for you for very nominal fee once you upgrade. When you do, you help yourself, you help us continue to do this work, and you help us step out of the traditional media model that does not allow the networks to even talk about this stuff, so that we can get you the vital information you need to be vital in your life. Back to the interview.
So this is an important principle. I'm glad you asked this, because we see energy and fatigue as kind of this mysterious phenomenon that, like, it's who knows what's going on in these mysterious biochemicals inside of our body. But to a large extent, we need to understand it through the frame that I just presented here. So let's imagine somebody's dealing with the problem of, oh, I've got really weak muscles. How do you solve the problem? It's, you challenge the muscles to grow them bigger and stronger. Okay. Now imagine I told you, using this same frame, imagine I told you, hey, I've got really weak mitochondria. What do you think I should do about it? What makes sense to you now?
Start using your muscles.
Start using your mitochondria.
Yeah, exactly.
Challenge
Yeah,
challenge them. They grow bigger and stronger. I told you the brain can go stronger, the heart can grow stronger, the muscles can grow stronger, the bones can go stronger. Guess what else can? Mitochondria.
yeah,
Right? And we lose 75% of that cellular engine as we grow older in most cases. How do we grow it back? We've got to challenge the mitochondria. The
yeah,
body only cares about survival. It doesn't care whether you walk through life with a degenerated brain and a frail body with no muscle on it and no strength, or an atrophied heart. It doesn't care whether you walk through life overflowing with energy or with chronic fatigue. It cares about survival. Okay. So what are the signals that you're providing your body with, that are saying, here's what you need to do in order to survive the demands of this environment we're in? If you never provide it the signal that it needs to be able to produce lots of energy to survive the environment that it's in, what reason does it have to have more energy? Most people don't think of energy like that. You'll see lots of doctors and functional medicine doctors talking about, this hormone and this biochemical and toxins and viruses and da da da. Nobody's understanding it like this. Okay. This is, what is the physical structure of your cellular engine, and what are the signals that impact on that system? How do we have a robust, strong, powerful cellular engine or a weak one? What's the determining force? It's the amount of demands on that system. So, how do we create those demands? What I call physiological challenges. There are Exercise is essential, and there are multiple types of exercise, mainly resistance exercise, sprinting or high intensity interval type training, and endurance exercise is huge. Thermal stress, heat and cold. So think like saunas, fasting, hypoxic stress, and there are many, many others as well. Even cognitive stress, cognitive demands is going to build mitochondria at the level of the brain. That's part of how we increase cognitive reserve capacity. So the different types of stressors will have each have their own fingerprint of adaptations that they're stimulating, but they all stimulate mitochondria, because whatever demand you're putting on the system requires a bioenergetic supply. You're putting more energy demand on that system. It requires a response. Okay. So, um, each one of them stimulates adaptations in different parts of the system. So certain types of physiological challenges will stimulate the heart, for example, and mitochondria in the heart and the muscles of the heart and the chamber of the heart, the left ventricle, to expand, to pump more blood with each stroke. Some of them will stimulate the muscles to grow, the fast twitch muscles, and more mitochondria in those specific tissues. Some of them stimulate at the level of the lungs, stimulate at the brain. Some stimulate the vascular supply to grow more new blood vessels, and also put mitochondria in all those new blood vessels. So, each one is stimulating different kinds of adaptations and building mitochondria more in different parts of that system. But that's the basic idea of how it works. And one of the most essential things to have more energy is you've got to build your cellular engine.
you'd mentioned allostatic load earlier in our hour, right? It all works unless it's too much, right? So we need a somewhat of a Goldilocks zone of enough stress to tell the body to go versus the guy who collapses, right? So how do we gauge that?
It's a great question. Great to reconcile this with what I'm saying. So, first of all, not all stress is created equal. There's two important aspects to this. One is, what is the type of stress? Certain types of stress, because stress is a broad word that describes hundreds of different things. Okay. So there's certain types of stressors, and psychological stress or emotional stress. Your girlfriend breaking up with you is different than overdoing it in the gym, right? And is different than having an intense infection, COVID, or a bad flu, or mononucleosis, or something, and lots of other examples. Um, what is the type of stress? Some are more biologically compatible than others, meaning some are much more likely to cause harm than others, and some are much more likely to cause beneficial adaptations than others. Not all stress is equal. The other really important aspect of this is um, chronicity versus acute stress. Okay. In general, any type of chronic stress is going to be harmful. Even if we took something like exercise, which I just told you is an incredibly potent medicine, if you do 8 hours of intense exercise every day, you're going to be pretty screwed up by it. It's going to be mostly harmful for you. You can overdo anything. Sun exposure is vital for your health. You can overdo that. You can even overdo food, even if you ate healthy food. You can overdo it where if you just really overconsume it, it's harmful for you and it will cause fat gain. It will cause metabolic problems. It will cause insulin resistance. So everything can become harmful when you do too much of it and too chronic. And certainly that's true of psychological stress. It's true of toxins, especially. And again, each type of stressor has its own fingerprint of how likely it is to cause harm and how likely it is to stimulate adaptations that lead to benefits. So being chronically exposed to mold is likely to cause harm, not very likely to cause benefits, right?
Yeah, and that's where people don't know how to gauge it, right? In the same system that's putting out research in a biochemical model, it's also training patients to think one size fits all. And so, look, if you say sauna is good, I'm going to spend the rest of my life in this sauna. It's not how it works, right? It's an ecology model. So, just high level. I know we're running out of time here. High level, you mentioned a number of the stressors: heat, cold, psychological, physiological. I think from before, I know bitter is part of it, right? What else is part of this gestalt? How do you pepper your mitochondria in a systems based model to bring the system up on all fronts?
The different types of exercise, first of all, are absolutely essential. So we've got to get that dialed in. And we need multiple different types of exercise to do this well. The most essential one for mitochondrial health systemically, not only in the muscular system, but also in the cardiovascular system, in the respiratory system, in the vessels, the blood vessels themselves, and at the level of the brain, is zone 2 endurance exercise. And this is exercise specifically in the roughly 60 to 70% of your max heart rate, uh, and staying there for roughly 40, 45 minutes or more. You could stay there. It's sort of a minimum of about 40 minutes. Um, and the reason that this is so potent in stimulating benefits for the mitochondria, particularly at the muscular level, but also throughout the body, is the fuel sources that are used during this activity. So the basic gist of it is, as the intensity of exercise increases, we will rely less and less on fat to fuel that exercise and more on carbohydrates to fuel it. At a certain point, the intensity not only shifts from burning predominantly fat to burning carbohydrate, but it also shifts from burning the fuel inside the mitochondria to burning fuel outside the mitochondria. So when we do very intense bursts of effort, it's predominantly fuel that's being burned outside the mitochondria. And the reason why is that we have another energy production process that is faster than the mitochondrial energy production process. And so if we're doing something that's really fast, intense burst of efforts, we have to use that faster system. Now, the problem with that is that we're taking some of the stress load off the mitochondria when we do that. So where we increase the demand on the mitochondria and before it drops off and switches to fuel production outside the mitochondria instead of within the mitochondria, that point is right around what's called zone 2 endurance exercise. Okay, around 60 to 70% roughly of your maximum heart rate, and you stay there for about 40 minutes. That puts the maximal amount of demand on mitochondrial energy production. And by virtue of putting the maximal amount of demand on that specific system, we're concentrating the amount of adaptations that occur at that. So that's certainly number one. But I
Question
also,
question on that real quick. Most people have not done the fancy VO2 max. Do you recommend Harris-Benedict equation? Like how do most people back out their max to then go 60-70% of that number? Back a napkin calculation even.
yeah. So the way you do it is by estimating heart rate. So the max heart rate is you can be estimated roughly. It's not exact, obviously, and it differs a bit between individuals. But the max heart rate simple equation is 220 minus your age. So I'm 40 years old. It's 180 for me. Now the true number also is going to be influenced by, maybe some degree genetics, and certainly it's influenced by your health status, your fitness status. So maybe as somebody who's very fit for a 40-year-old, maybe my true maximum heart rate is 190 or maybe 200. Okay. And also it goes in the other direction. There's a guy, Phil Maffetone, I think, who is a big advocate of a particular kind of running, like how to improve running performance. He would have people stay in this zone. And he had basically this equation. You estimate your max heart rate in this way, and then it's plus or minus 5 or 10. I think he's got a calculator on his website. Plus or minus 5 to 10 for are you fit or are you overweight and that sort of thing. And so you can further estimate your maximum heart rate based on your age and those other factors. And then from there, you just take, okay, what's 60, 70% of this? Let's say 65% of this. So you just go times 0.65. And now you have that number. Okay. And that's the beats per minute that you want to stay at.
And that's
So
beats per
you can
minute,
now,
45 minutes to hit the sweet spot is right around there. I heard, 45 to 90 minutes, depending on who you talk to. So you're saying 45 before you really getting the squeeze out of the lemon. And then at what point do you know when to stop?
well, so the thing with this type of exercise is that it's not going to be exhausting. You're not going to exhaust yourself. And I mean, you will initially probably if you're really out of shape. But for somebody who's in shape, you're going and doing this exercise and it's relatively easy. This is not, so there's 5 zones. Okay. And there's some different systems. Sometimes they break it down into 6 or 7, but zone 5 is the most intense zone. So that's where you're like going all out and you're going to feel wiped out and exhausted. Zone 2 is a moderate intensity. So like walking is zone 1. Zone 2 is a light jog or pedaling on the bicycle at something beyond just sort of a very casual pace. You're going a little bit higher intensity, but it's not really hard where you're pushing really hard. So it's something you can sustain for a long period of time. You're not wiping yourself out. Where you know to stop is essentially what your current capacity is. So I'll give you an example. I stop just based on time. I'm going to do a 45-minute session or a 50-minute session. When I get to that number, time's up. My parents are just starting out on this. They're in their 70s, 75, almost 80 years old. My mom's almost 80. I'm just getting her back into this. She had a hip replacement recently, and now I'm getting her back into doing this. So just a few weeks ago, she just started and she could do only 8 minutes on the elliptical machine at this heart rate before she felt, okay, this is too much. This is very hard. Okay. Now she's doing, a few days later, she did 12 minutes. She just told me the other day she did 24 minutes. So she's going to take, in a few months, it'll take her that time to build up to 45 minutes. But as far as when she knows to stop, it's really, okay, what was day 1? How much could you get in this zone? 8 minutes, fine. Day 2, the next time you do it, try to get 9 minutes or 10 minutes. And it's really that simple. The systematic progression part is really critical to understand because, again, going back to what I said earlier, the body only cares about survival. And what that means is if you want it to adapt, you have to give it a survival demand. If you already do something that it's capable of, that doesn't push it. It doesn't create a signal for it to adapt to anything. So at best, you're going to just maintain. But if you actually want to stimulate new adaptations to improve your physiology, you have to have this systematic progression built into it. And that's based on wherever you're at currently and how do you build on that.
And to follow with what we've been talking about, when she was at 8 minutes and now she's at 24, is that quantity of mitochondria, quality of mitochondria? Like, what does the engine look like in that adaptive difference between her sessions? Like, what is happening inside that's building?
So in the studies that show this loss of 75% of mitochondrial capacity as we grow older, this is a combination of two, more than this, but two fundamental things. One is the mitochondria that are present are physically shrinking and atrophying and becoming more damaged, becoming more dysfunctional, losing their ability to produce as much energy. And in addition to that, there's a 50% reduction in terms of that, in terms of, if you've got 1,000 mitochondria in the cell, those 1,000 mitochondria now can only produce 50% as much energy as they used to be able to when you were younger. In addition to that, it's also the case that there used to be 2,000 mitochondria in the cell. So there's also a 50% loss of mitochondria. They literally shriveled away, atrophied, and died off. And so both of those two things are occurring. And if a 50% loss of the number of mitochondria and a 50% reduction of energy production capacity by the mitochondria that are present is if you do the math, that's a 75% loss of mitochondrial capacity. So when we do these kinds of physiological challenges that stimulate the mitochondria, we are reversing both. So we stimulate mitochondrial growth, we stimulate many different mutations at the level of the mitochondria and increased complexes in the electron transport chain and lots of other things. The physical shape of the mitochondria and the structure and mitophagy and mitochondrial fission and fusion and lots of other dynamics that are taking place. But the basic idea is mitochondria are growing bigger and stronger, and we're stimulating mitochondrial biogenesis to create more mitochondria in there. And this is not a small effect. So there's studies that that have shown within 8 weeks or 12 weeks of putting 65-year-old people on high intensity interval training program or something like that, that you can stimulate an increase of mitochondrial capacity by 60-70% in 2 to 3 months. So, what took decades to lose doesn't necessarily need to take decades to regain. It can be months to regain.
That's the funniest part of this whole story, and we're running out of time, and I want to come full circle on this kind of paradigm shift, right? That is the miracle drug by all stretches of the imagination. If a drug did that in 3 months, oh, you just take this drug for 3 months and here's your result, it would be the number one blockbuster drug of all time, slam dunk, book closed.
That's right. That's exactly right. And I'm glad you brought that up. That's something I literally say, and maybe I've said it to you in a past interview, or maybe you said it to me and I stole it from you. I can't remember. But, I open up my book on red light therapy, for example, with exactly that line. If there were a drug that could do this, and certainly this is true of nutrition, certainly it's true of exercise, it's true of all these different physiological challenges. Sauna therapy, for example, it's associated with 60+% reductions in risk of dementia, 50-60% reductions in stroke and cardiovascular disease, reductions in the major killers, and all kinds of other benefits, improving sport performance, enhancing recovery, combating depression, improving overall energy levels by bolstering mitochondrial health. improving cardiovascular function, lots and lots of benefit. If there were a drug, as you said, that could do that, what a sauna does or what exercise does, any one of those things, it would be the best, most potent, amazing miracle drug the world has ever seen. Every doctor would just prescribe it to everyone in the world, and your doctor would look at you like you're nuts if you don't take this drug. But what people don't understand is these drugs already exist. They're just not in the form of pill from a pharmaceutical.
But Ari, how do I do it without exercise? And that's the problem. We've been trained to not understand that we have to play an active role in
Yeah.
our wellness.
I believe that, and this is the argument I'm making in my new book, that we need to shift. I was reading Peter Attia's book, Outlive, and he makes this. He presents this construct of medicine 1.0, 2.0, medicine 3.0. 1.0 is the ancient Greeks who were the first to say, and you would probably argue with this actually, because probably the ancient Chinese and maybe some of the other Eastern medical traditions maybe came first. I don't know the exact timeline, but the ancient Greeks and their four humors and Hippocrates and the idea that disease was coming from natural forces, that diet mattered and other natural things were causing these diseases was a breakthrough, and that's what he's calling medicine 1.0, because previously there was focus was basically on like disease is a will of the gods and supernatural forces and that kind of thing. Medicine 2.0 is essentially what most people are doing now. It's conventional medicine. It's got lots and lots of breakthroughs, the antibiotic revolution, Viagra. There's certainly a long list of other things, emergency medicine, prosthetics, when you got trauma, when you've got broken bones, you've been shot, you've been in a bad car accident, it's incredible what we can do with medicine 2.0. But medicine 3.0 is his idea that for all these chronic diseases of aging, medicine 2.0 has not been successful, this pharmaceutical approach. So what he's saying is we need medicine 3.0 that intervenes earlier, and nutrition and lifestyle are the big key to it. I would argue, first of all, that lots of natural health experts have been saying that for decades. So there isn't that much new there, but I actually believe that there's a further shift that's necessary, which is that we need to get out of medicine 3.0 towards health 1.0. And what I mean by that is we need to stop externalizing all of our power and saying, please, I'm going to go to the doctor and they're going to run tests on me and find my dysfunction and they're going to prescribe pharmaceuticals for me. And that's going to make me healthy. Right? And instead of that, we need to start thinking of ourselves as athletes. We need to have the mindset of an athlete, not the mindset of a sick medical patient in need of testing to figure out dysfunction and taking drugs, but the mindset of an athlete where we're saying, I'm going to train for energy and resilience and disease prevention and longevity. Okay, we're not training for performance in a particular sport. We're training for longevity. And I believe is an important mindset shift, that we take the power away from all the pharmaceutical companies and the medical industrial complex, and we put the power back into the people. We realize that they are actually the ones that control their health destiny.
I love that. Almost a shift into saying you have to train to be a grandparent, right? Like you want the privilege of being able to be with your grandchildren. You have to train for it. I think Mother Teresa said it in a slightly different way, but the same kind of thesis. She won't go to an anti-war rally, but she'll go to a pro-peace rally, right? It's not about disease. It's about vitality, right? It's not about how do I lose weight? It's how do I build muscle? How do I build capacity and resilience and all these things, right? Ari, your hero, always a pleasure. Really enjoy the work that you're doing. Can't wait for the next book. I'm just a big fan of the work that you're doing. How do people find you?
The best place to find me is, well, my new website is humanoptimization.com. That's the one that's being launched now. My previous brand that I've been building for the last decade or so is theenergyblueprint.com. Now I'm kind of shifting everything over to humanoptimization.com.
I can see why. Thank you so much.
Thank you, my friend. Always a pleasure.